Antiochus concisely declared the reason for vocal silence, right? With our lips, not talking so much. Quotes, a monk or a Christian in general should say many things to God, but few to men. A Christian should say many things to God, but few to men. Why? Because immoderate talkativeness, which distracts the mind, not only makes him idle with regard to spiritual work, but it also surrenders him to the demon of listlessness. St. Ephrem the Syrian says, he who speaks much among the brothers will be hated, but he who keeps watch over his mouth will be loved. St. Theodokos of Photiki taught, just as when the doors of the baths are left continually open, the heat inside is quickly driven out, so also with the soul. When it wishes to say many things, even though everything it says may be good, disperses its concentration through the door of the voice. Moreover, Christ himself warns us of the danger of idle talk. Every idle word that men shall speak, they will give account on the day of judgment. St. Sophronia of Essex observed, when someone talks a lot, he becomes spiritually weak. And Elder Emilianos taught his monks, silence characterizes a man of God, for within silence is God and prayer. Let's move on. I think those are pretty self explanatory. It is particularly harmful to have discussions after divine liturgy, especially if one has just received Holy Communion. This is very interesting. When Abba Isaac of Thebes was asked why he would flee from the brethren at the end of the divine liturgy, he replied, I'm not fleeing from the brethren, but from the evil craftiness of the demons. For if a person has a lighted lamp and hangs around, standing out in the wind, it is extinguished by it. So we who are illumined by the Holy Spirit in the Eucharist, if we hang out, should say hang out, hang around outside our cell, our mind is darkened. This is why Elder Athanasius of Grigoriou taught, be careful. After liturgy, withdraw somewhere, and in silence, experience whatever you have been given from the liturgy. Avoid speaking and never laugh after liturgy. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting advice from the saints about talkativeness and silence. It's very interesting. Let's go back a second and just spend a little bit of time here from some of these sayings from the saints. Um, so the general rule of thumb for all Orthodox Christians, and we're all called to be hesychas in one way or another, a little bit or a lot, according to St. Peter of Damascus. We heard that first class. Is that the general principle is that we should talk only when necessary, just like we should only work when necessary, right? We should keep our earthly cares and work to the bare minimum to whatever is necessary. Same thing with talking. We should only talk when necessary and actually keep our words limited. This is the general rule of thumb, right? Why? Because when we practice silence, when we actually don't talk a lot to people, what happens? We can avoid um, idle talk. We can avoid inappropriate speech and joking. We can avoid, um, saying things that may be hurtful or offensive to people, right? So we avoid a lot of sins and a lot of problems in our life by not talking so much. It's really interesting, very fascinating. But on the flip side, when we keep our mouths shut and we don't talk so much, we actually can be um, using that to pray more, to be talking to God more. And in that prayer, we receive the grace of God in abundance. So we can actually be benefiting spiritually in that silence. Um, And I really like this thing from Saint Sophronia of Essex, and I could personally relate to this. He says, when someone talks a lot, he becomes spiritually weak. It's very, very true. And that's actually what one of the other saints or Christian writers said, is that when we talk a lot, it actually burdens the soul. It actually tires it out and taxes it out. And then we get to the point where, I don't really have a desire or enthusiasm, a zeal, desire to go and pray or do anything spiritual. These guys, these saints, these scholars, these Christian writers, they're speaking from their own personal experience, right? And they're saying, look, this is the pitfalls that can happen in our life. So be careful, right? Be careful with talking so much. Um, and then from the other um, thing, the other slide, very interesting. And this might be kind of like a hard word for us. And of course, we would have to judge by our own unique situations and all the rest. But in parish, in the typical parish, right? Usually we have coffee hour, right? We get together after liturgy and we have a cup of coffee together. We have some a light brunch with our fellow parishioners, and that's nice. It's nice for camaraderie. It's nice to catch up with people. It's nice to spend time with our friends and our family. And this kind of like reflecting back to the agape meal in the early church. And also, I know from many priests that I've spoken to, coffee hour is also a great time for the clergy to go and spend time with his parishioners, with his flock, to catch up with them and attend to their life and what's going on. And so, I guess you could say coffee hour in a sense has its place, but what's higher than that is actually silence, right? And I don't know about you, but just speaking from my own personal experience a little bit, I find that, when I go to liturgy and I commune, and then afterwards I go into coffee hour and there's all this noise and distractions and laughing and this and that and talking to people and, going from person to person to person, at the end of it, I don't feel the same peace and joy and contentment that I received from the liturgy. It's like it goes away. It's like I've lost it. I don't know why, but it seems to me that this is kind of what the saints are kind of speaking to, is that there's a certain spiritual law at work that happens when this goes on. So it'd be perhaps good to, I mean, speak to your spiritual father about it, but maybe sometimes we should go to liturgy, commune, and then afterwards we just come home and we have a very quiet, calm, non-rush day, spending the rest of the day in prayer and spiritual study, that kind of thing, not doing a whole lot of, talking and running around and doing a bunch of work that's not necessary and all the rest, so that we can actually preserve that grace and that peace that we received from the liturgy. So just something to take into consideration. I thought it was really interesting in regard to this topic. So let's move on here. We're finishing up here. Another beautiful quote. This I kind of chuckled a little bit reading this quote here from Saint Paisius Velichovsky, wonderful Saint Romania who passed on the Hesychastic tradition, and he has a whole chapter there on silence. And here's what he says. This is really interesting. He who has controlled his tongue will hold in check his whole body. He who is continent in his tongue will flee from every evil which comes from it. That's what we just heard a second ago from the other saints. The tongue is an uncontrollable evil. Many have perished from the sharp sword, but not as many as from their own tongue. Wow, it's powerful. For the tongue is a double edged sword which invisibly slaughters the soul and body, which utters empty words constantly in idle spectacles. O tongue, the enemy of my righteousness! O tongue, my destroyer and the spirit of Satan! For by much labor a man builds his spiritual building, salvation. But you, O tongue, by one word, in a single hour, destroy and annihilate it. A wise man attaches himself to silence. Wow, wow, wow. What a word. What a word. My goodness. Let's move on here. From Elder Ephraim of Arizona, disciple of St. Joseph the Hesychast, what does he say about silence? He says it's a great virtue. It's a great virtue we should try to develop in our life. What does he say? He says, compel yourself in silence, the mother of all godly virtues. Silence is the greatest and most fruitful virtue. For this reason, the God bearing fathers called it sinlessness. At your work, only speak in moderation when necessary. Do not speak unnecessary words, my child, for they chill your soul's divine zeal. That's what St. Sophrony said. Love silence, which gives birth to all virtues and fences in the soul, so that the devil's evil does not approach it. Silence generates stillness and tranquility within our souls, which automatically creates compunction. The tongue does the greatest harm to man. Be careful with your tongue and your thoughts, for guarding them fills the soul with the light of God. But he whose mouth is unbridled deposits various impurities in his soul. Avoid idle words at all costs, for they weaken the soul, and then it does not have the strength to struggle. This is no time for daydreaming, but a season for spiritual profit. Who can guarantee that after going to sleep we shall wake up? Therefore, let us compel ourselves. When one keeps silent, he is given time and freedom for prayer and concentration. But when he passes his hour carelessly, he does not have time to pray. Furthermore, through his careless speech, he accumulates various sins. For this reason, the Holy Fathers place the virtue of silence at the summit of the virtues. For without it, no virtue is able to remain in the soul of man. Always be prudent in your words. That is, first think and then speak. Do not let your tongue run ahead before you think what you have to say. Do not become bold in talking much, my child. Many are the evils from this evil boldness. Flee from it as from a fire or a viper. And his holy elder Joseph the Hesychast, what does he say about the virtue of vocal silence? He says, if we take a scale and put all the virtues on one side and silence on the other, the scale will tilt towards silence. For when a monk is silent or a Christian is silent for the right reason, he will be praying or contemplating divine things. When he is silent and prays, he will have compunction, mourning, tears, peace, and tranquility. When a person is silent, he does not criticize, talk idly, tell lies, slander, or speak about vain matters. Thus, his soul will acquire grace. Silence brings compunction. Compunction brings tears. Tears bring purification. And purification makes a person worthy to see God. He sees God by mystically perceiving him in his heart, and he sees things that one could never dream of or describe.